Welcome to Side by Side, a podcast where I, Robert Kuang, take you inside conversations with artists, creatives, healers, and warriors taking the charge in their transformational story. Today's guest is Billy Wynne, the author of The Empty Path, Finding Fulfillment Through the Radical Art of Lessening. As a student of Buddhism and mindfulness for 30 years, he received his meditation teaching certification under Kornfield and Brach, and his lay Zen Buddhist ordination from the Zen Center of Denver, where he teaches classes and serves on the board. In this conversation, we unpack the practice of lessening in a world built on the pursuit of having more, and its connection to Buddhist concepts such as detachment, freedom, and suffering. You can find more side-by-side episodes at sidebysidepodcast.podbean.com. And if you'd like to connect with me about my services, please visit www.robertquanhome.com. All right, so it's nice to meet you, Billy. I'm speaking to another Coloradoan. I grew up in Longmont when I came to America, and all of my friends went to Boulder. Did you actually grow up in Colorado yourself?
No, I grew up in Virginia, and I moved out here in 2009 with my wife and my daughter.
Okay, gotcha. How's Colorado treating you?
Oh, amazing. Yeah, no, we're don't plan to leave. We're actually moving to Carbondale in June.
Oh, nice.
But we've loved it, the lifestyle, the weather.
Yeah. Growing up 20 minutes outside of Boulder, I didn't know this because I was just going to school, but there was quite the meditative, spiritual, some would say like a hippie community there that I just kind of grew up around, but didn't really recognize at the time. So it's really funny to be diving in with you. And congratulations on your book, by the way. I'm curious what the writing process was like for you. What made you decide to take on this book that I think to some people may be somewhat daunting, and how did this begin?
Sure. Well, it really happened after I closed Awake, which was the alcohol-free bar that my wife and I had started in Denver. I was decompressing in the fall of 2022. I write about this in my book, kind of reached my wit's end in terms of stress. And I had layered opening that bar on top of the rest of my professional life. So it was very, very busy time. It was in that fall that I realized that I had really bought into this idea of mooring as the path to happiness and fulfillment. And actually, it's really the opposite in my experience of lessening and distilling our experience of life to really be grateful for what we have. And so that was kind of the spark of inspiration. But kind of more practically speaking, my wife had an idea of working on a book at the time, and she had a book coach, Ruby Warrington, who's an excellent author and book coach and writes a lot in the alcohol-free space and other areas. So I said, well, let me talk to Ruby, and because I wanted to write about this kind of realization I'd had around mooring versus lessening. And Ruby had a book coming out that spring, and so she introduced me to Bess Matassa, who became my book coach. And Bess really helped me turn this kind of hodgepodge of relatively vague ideas into a more concrete book concept. And she helped me write the book proposal, which your listeners may or may not know is a key step in having a nonfiction book at least published. It's really a different path from memoirs and fiction, but for nonfiction, a book proposal is really the tried and true way to seek publication. And so in that, I wrote the introduction, and I wrote the chapter 4 about work, which is now in the book. And really through that process with her, number one, I figured out what the book was about. It was about emptiness. It was about my experience of, the art of lessening and about my own life, really, in many ways. She taught me a lot about how to write in terms of, for a broader audience, to try to take these, especially with regard to the Buddhist ideas, kind of esoteric and maybe mysterious, inaccessible concepts into something that hopefully translates, it's practical and meaningful for anyone, whether they're Buddhist or not, or have any, background in that field or not. And so that took several months. And then with that book proposal, I shopped for an agent. I sent it out to about 20, and 19 said no, and one said yes, Leslie Meredith, who is now my agent at Drysdale Goderick. And Leslie spent another couple months with me refining the proposal yet again for the publisher audience. And she sent it out to 20 or so publishers. And again, 19 said no, and one said yes. And that was New World Library. Eckhart Tolle is their kind of marquee name. They have many other great authors that they publish. And then that was probably let's see, the end of 2023 that I signed that deal. And then Jason Gardner at New World Library was like, okay, write the rest of the book. I was like, you sure you don't want to kind of see bits and pieces as I go? And he's like, no, just make it track with the introduction and chapter 4 that you gave us.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, you say so. So I wrote the remaining 9 chapters in the winter spring of 24 and sent that manuscript to him, I guess in April. From there on, it really was more technical. I mean, they were very easy and supportive to work with, kind of trusted my creativity at that point, which I really appreciate. And so it was, but still a very, relatively arduous process of copy editing, just revising and revising. And that was really complete in the fall of 24, and it went into production in late fall 24. And so just working on kind of launch activities. And the book came out last Tuesday. So it's really been exciting to finally, it's really over 2.5 years later that it started.
You can finally exhale.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, I remember somebody telling me early on when I had I think I had a first draft of a proposal at that point. And he's like, it's going to take about 2 years. And I was like, no way. How could it possibly take 2 years? And it was definitely 2 years or more from that point.
I think people, when they think of creative projects, they don't realize sometimes the labor of love. And sometimes people are like, well, why would you do this? And I was like, you need to ask every single author, because they'll tell you something wildly different and probably still will be confusing because of the labor of love that's involved. Was there any part of the process that was like the most surprising to you?
I guess the process of refining the proposal was very involved, and just persistent line by line editing, and that's really credit to Bess and Leslie, my book coach and agent. And yet the process with the publisher was not like that at all. Like I said, it was much more open, and really 90+% of their edits were more technical in nature, not substantive. So I expected it to, that to kind of be the beginning, and then it would get, even more kind of in depth and rewriting the book really with the publisher. And at least for me in this book, that did not turn out to be the case. I'll say, and this also speaks to your first question, I personally really enjoyed the process of writing itself. I'm fortunate that I was at a spot in my career where I had some free time and flexibility, during the week to write. It wasn't like nights and weekends. I could write during the day, and particularly waking up in the morning, my son goes off to school, I get a cup of coffee, and to have a couple hours at least. And it did take me, I had to have at least 3 hours to feel like I could really get immersed and get some momentum going and produce, a decent body of work for the day. That part I really, really enjoyed. Felt creative, felt interesting. Like it was like, okay, I'm going to find out what my words put out today. It's like, you don't know until you just start tapping away at the keyboard what's going to appear.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, so what am I going to say about, play and equanimity today? I don't know until I write it. So that was actually fun. It was not like, oh God, I got to write 1,000 pages today, or, it wasn't, I didn't look at it that way, and it didn't feel that way at the time. That was the most fun part.
That's so wonderful to hear, because people often there's a particular image that people have of like the the solitude suffering writer, so to speak. So it's really nice to hear that, number one, it's a collaborative process at the end of the day, but also number two, it can definitely be born out of a little bit of joy. And it makes sense considering your book is called The Empty Path. You're exploring kind of a different way of looking at these words that I think than what people are generally used to when you think of emptiness, and also the practice of lessening, which are two topics that we'll basically be focusing on this conversation. People might be thinking of a lack, or to do without, or to be without, but this book is really speaking on these two terms, really, or concepts, very differently. So maybe we can just start there. It's very broad, but how do you approach these ideas, and why are they important to you?
Yeah, well, thank you. So, gets right to the heart of the book. And I think that the standard kind of definition and understanding of emptiness is the reason that it is usually skipped over entirely, or given, a very light brush in books about Buddhism, because lots of books about Buddhism are out there, and many of them talk about compassion and love and joy and peace. And, all of those are wonderful fruits of Buddhist thought and practice. Also, of course, thought and practice and many other spiritual traditions. And yet emptiness for me is kind of at the core, like, the understanding of emptiness, the realization of emptiness is really at the core of the tradition that unlocks all of these, the bounty of these gifts of life that we can then experience. But it's a little bit tricky, especially at first glance, to understand why. Rather than nihilism or meaninglessness or, sort of despair, emptiness is really the nature of things. That is why nothing is separate. Right? It's we have this, I think, kind of primal feeling that there's some kind of unity or oneness to our existence, right? That we get different glimpses of in different ways in different, in our life. And the way that Buddhism sort of explains why that is the case, for me, is the most direct and clear. And at the heart of it is emptiness. And there's a couple of different aspects of emptiness which help us understand what it is that I go into detail in the book. One of them is impermanence. So all things, kind of come into being and go out of being. And also in every moment, all things are changing and becoming something different, even, moment to moment. It's right. It's not the same river. It's not the same person stepping in the river. No person can step into the same river, twice. So it's that basic concept. And then the other is the idea of what Buddhists call no self, which basically just means that if you examine something, a chair or, this cup or ourselves, and you look at all the different aspects of it as it's presented here and now, but also the things that contributed to it coming into being and all of the different ways of thinking about it and so forth, not one of those things makes the thing what it is. Is it the plastic, or is it the water, or is it, what makes the cup a cup? And if you really, and I do this a couple times throughout the book because it's really a key thing to try to understand, there's not one thing. The fact that there's this kind of inherent abiding identity to things is also a lens for viewing its emptiness. And when things are empty, they don't have boundaries. They are not separate. So that's kind of the one way to understand how really we are not separate from all those things around us, because these boundaries that we imagine to be there are not really the final word, on how these things are. Really tapping into that, and it takes a book to really try to understand it. It takes examples from life. It takes meditation practices to really sink into this idea of emptiness. But when we do, we really can change our experience of life. And it is very practical here and now. And it does start to open up these benefits of our own life and also the Buddhist tradition of joy and peace and happiness.
Yeah, this is a very early quote, I believe. And I just wanted to read this out loud from your book. After exhausting every other strategy, from excessively indulgent hedonism to total ascetic abandonment, the Buddha saw the emptiness of all things, of every manner in which we experience our lives, as the Heart Sutra says. It was this profound insight that enabled him to sunder the bonds, abandon the attachments that create suffering. And so initially, even as someone who's familiar at least with the concepts without being a practicing Buddhist, emptiness and detachment and all of that, there's like a I don't want that automatic reaction sometimes. And yet the word that I think people really understand is that, our attachments is what creates suffering. And I do think, as much as those words are somewhat like people don't understand them, people do understand suffering. And there's always that desire to reduce and lessen suffering. And people have been trying to figure that out for a long time. So I just wanted to connect that as well, that a lot of this has to do with the fact that we walk into suffering over and over again.
Yeah. And it's really this idea that I'm over here, and that thing that, either I desire or I want to avoid is over there, and I'm over here, and that person is over there, and we are separate, is why suffering arises, right? It's why we feel scarcity. It's why we feel fear. It's why we feel craving. The reason that the recognition and inquiry into emptiness is helpful is because it helps us soften those attachments. We start to see things differently, and we become less attached to them, whether it's be craving or aversion. And that's really what helps us ease the suffering in our own lives. And more, kind of specifically, what it means is that sad things are going to keep happening. Frustrating things are going to, just all of that is going to keep, life is going to keep happening, but we can be with those experiences in a different way. So rather than just being kind of tossed around by the waves of our, the experience of our life, we know we can have a kind of this abiding peace, right? That the waves of life cannot really, push aside. And the way, a key way, at least, to tap into that is through this experience of emptiness. And also meditation practices and other sort of features of this path of lessening that I outline in the book.
Yeah, and I want to go into the kind of the structure of each chapter. It's very
Yeah.
deliberate, and they're kind of different components, right? And it's very deliberately structured from the more autobiographical portions, which I found deeply moving. And also, I just appreciate anyone who's willing to share with that level of transparency, to guided meditations, to the discussion of concepts. Can you talk about how you formulated these chapters that way?
Yes. So thank you for touching on that. There's really, three kind of legs to the stool of the book in each chapter, and each one starts with an autobiographical anecdote from my life. And the reason for that is a couplefold. Number one, I felt like just launching into Buddhist ideas and meditation practices would be incomplete without demonstrating how they have manifested in my own life and really anchoring them there. And I didn't want to also, kind of pretend. I call it the I once was lost and now am found, narrative arc, where it's like, okay, I was a mess before, and now, and a lot of books follow this arc, right? And now I'm like, cured, and everything's wonderful. And it's like, but everybody knows that's not how life actually is, right? I've never met anyone who life is like that for. So the truth is that we have these experiences, and hopefully we learn something from them, right? And we find new practices, we discover new wisdom, and we start to integrate these into our life. And yes, we can change. I mean, that's the hopeful part of this book, and what I hope people get from it is like the underlying message is that like you are worthy of peace and joy in your life, and if you can experience it more frequently, and there are ways that you can do that. But at the same time, the wheel of life continues to turn, and it's not that pain and discomfort go away, but that you become more comfortable with them, and you kind of can learn how to navigate them. So anyway, so that's key reason why autobiographical component is there. And then really, yeah, there's a portion of each chapter. There's a different facet of the jewel of emptiness. So it's there's non-self, there's impermanence, there's kind of the interdependence of things, there's equanimity, I talk about forgiveness. There's just different teachings that can help us get closer and more personally intimate with this core idea of emptiness. And then yes, each chapter ends with a guided meditation. And folks can also listen to those on my website at billywynne.com, because it's a little funky to read a meditation while you're trying to meditate. And there it is really because it's one thing to understand, with our discursive intellectual mind, some of these ideas, and emptiness is the paramount example of this. It's like, it can make sense to us sort of on paper and in words, but unless we really feel it in our bones and our marrow, it's probably not going to change our life. And that's where meditation can be important. It's like you really want to settle into this and feel, the truth of this for yourself on a first person perspective. That's when it's really going to start to have a transformative effect. And so that's why the meditations are there.
Thank you for sharing that, because, I think people think of, well, these practices are there when I have the time and space and quiet, finally the kids are out of the house. And then
Yeah.
maybe I can look at this and try to sit and be with my thoughts and feelings,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Such is life. It may not always be the case. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, readers should really dive into your book, because you do share quite a bit about your life. But can you give an example of when it may have been very challenging to practice emptiness and detachment and
Oh,
lessening, and what happened after?
gosh. Well, how about this morning? I mean,
Right.
like in the car, so I dropped my son off at school, and I don't want to overshare here, but let's just say he wants to have a party at our house this spring. And so I was working on that question, and my wife and I want to try to make that work, but there are certain parameters that we have to put around that. He's in eighth grade. I don't know if I already said that. So, we had to put around that concept. And, he didn't like all the things that I was saying. And so it was very challenging because, from my kind of ego self, which was definitely arising as it does, it's like, hey, I'm trying to be nice here. We're trying to make this work for you. And you're, kind of now negotiating the details, that kind of thing. So like, what the heck is, a natural response, and very often is the response that we give in difficult circumstances. But also I was remembering, and I've had done this thousands of times, and I do talk about a couple of incidents with my son. I also have a daughter, and then with my wife, these people who are close to us, it's often people we love the most. This can be the most difficult, right? We're the most attached and I am keeping in mind in this conversation this morning, fortunately, it doesn't always happen, I really, really love this person. And I see him in a broader context than just this conversation. First of all, I see the depth of his life experience and all of that, but also that I do have this, as I've practiced more and more and more, this kind of abiding sense of the underlying, emptiness and therefore unity of things. It does create a peaceful undertone to our lives, right? More often, at least. There are times where it goes away, goes out the window, but more and more, it starts to just be there. It starts to be, some call it the centered place, like, the centered place, where it's like, even though his response is not what I prefer, right? I don't have to trigger off into raising my voice and shaming him and kind of that direction. I can be clear. I don't have to agree to everything that he's saying, but I can do it in a gentler, more measured tone, which is going to be more effective. I submit I'm not an expert in parenting, but typically I think in the long run, at least, that's actually a more effective strategy, and it feels better at the time, and it yields better results in the future. So that's a small case. It wasn't flawless performance yet, right? By any stretch. If anybody had been there other than me and him, you would know. But I felt myself, okay, I've been here before, and I felt myself kind of sticking closer to that center than certainly I have in other cases.
I think, with family, it's often probably the best learning practice ground, if you will, for some of these things. And you do touch on, towards the kind of the empty path, there's the practice of lessening. And maybe we can parse that out a little bit more for people, because from when I am interpreting lessening, it's like maybe a little bit of a reframe, meaning
Yes.
it kind of, people when see it, they may see it in a very like literal way, but you're talking about it in a very specific way. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, also a word that I think on its face, is often interpreted differently. So this is not about, quitting your job, or, saying that material comforts are wrong, or that reading another book is wrong, or that, going on a meditation retreat is wrong. The crux of lessening is that the belief that those things are what are going to make you happy, right, are going to fulfill you, is actually is not the path to the solution. It's the path to the harm, right? It's the cause of suffering, is the idea that I'm not whole and complete, I am lacking, and therefore I need these these external things to fill this hole and to make me happy and feel like I'm fulfilled and complete. Because when we approach things with that attitude, it never works, right? Because we never actually believed in our own worthiness. We just thought the next thing was going to be the thing that finally, solves our kind of fundamental problem. So the path of lessening is not about saying you can't have a family and a job and a busy life and ambition and like all these things, which I have, and most people, have. But it is saying that we can change our experience of those things to really distill down our, the way we approach these different parts of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of thinking, okay, more and more, I need more strategies, I need more time, I need more, effort, I need, that's going to make me a better parent, for example. I need to say more things to my son. I need to add more instruction to his, really it's lessening my belief and my attachment and my application of those various facets, which, are often unnecessary. And when things are more distilled and really simplified, then I parent, and then it's often more at ease. It's clearer. I'm less easily frustrated in the process. Or you apply it to your job, or whatever your goals, or your kind of your interests are in your life, whatever you apply it to. It's not just more pleasant to do it; it tends to yield a better outcome when we can approach it that way of lessening. Which, and another way of thinking about it, is to be less attached to the outcome of the activity, right? So one thing I talk about in the compassion chapter, like in terms of like, let's say you have a cause, like a social justice, outcome, or a political belief, or something that you have. We all have them. It's like there's one way to go about it, which says, I have to get this at all costs. The people who are against me are dumb, right? And I have to defeat them. They are the enemy. And it's very easy, especially in politics, to slip into that mindset, right? Or we can say, this is a complicated issue. I have a point of view. I believe in my point of view, and I'm going to take steps to, address this injustice that I perceive to be in the world. There's other people with different points of view, and I'm going to address and navigate these steps compassionately. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be understanding. I'm going to be honest and have integrity of myself, but I'm not going to like fall into this, like, I'm on this side of the, line, you're on the other side. And, we're just going to fight it out. Right. So, and again, we do this all the time in lots of different contexts, but I think not only is I think kind of right, but it is more effective, to approach, and less burnout, and less frustration, and less pain in the process. So I do think that, and I say this in the book, how we go about our endeavors, whatever they may be, is as important as whether or not the endeavor is successful, right? Or whatever the outcome of the endeavor is. It's like we are making our presence and having our impact as we go, right? As much as we are kind of at the end of whatever this thing might be.
Thank you for saying that about the art of lessening, because you gave some examples in the book of what that could look like. And it was so expansive and it opened up my perspective. Particularly, you talk about lessening with time. And you talk about this
Yeah.
relative to lots of other important, pillars in our life as well. But one thing I did, because I moved from New York City to Vancouver, Canada last year, and we're about to move again, and there was a lot of like, oh, I'm gonna do this after, like I started doing like, this is for after the move, this is for before the move. And I was doing a lot of that for like an entire year because we knew we were going to be moving, and I really had to examine and inquire with myself why I was doing that, what were the things I was, I could not deal with until after the move.
Yeah.
And it was such an arbitrary interesting thing because it was all up to me. It was a
Yeah.
choice, right? The
Yeah.
way I saw it.
Yeah.
And things still happen, but it
Yeah.
was just, my framing of it was just so interesting. In particular, you talk about things with time and also particularly with work as well. So obviously
Yeah.
don't quit the job, but one of the biggest things people talk about that's a problem in their life would probably be work or dissatisfaction around that. Can you share a little bit about your perspective on this practice as it relates to like career and money and things like that?
Sure, sure. So I think it's interesting because with time, with work and kind of material, comfort and things, there is the reality, right? I mean, we have 24 hours in a day. So again, this is not about denying, right, authentic experience of life, right? Which there are hours and those types of things, and there's a need for, shelter and clothing and food, and there may be, perfectly healthy appetite for comfort, more travel to Europe and different things that people might want to do. So this doesn't dismiss any of that. What it says is that how we, feel constrained by time or by these material pressures or by our work, is the vast majority of that is self-imposed, right? So we can decide what our relationship with time is. We can decide how we come forth with our boss, right? We can decide how we, want to experience our workday, right? So the, and this also maybe ironically overlaps with the chapter about love, where I talk about freedom and responsibility, right? Freedom and responsibility. We tend to believe that, our circumstances define how we feel, right? It's like a codependence with our circumstances. We give up responsibility for how we feel to the things around us. It's like, well, I have a memo due tomorrow, and therefore I am stressed and unhappy, right? And I can't think about other things. This is a painful experience, and hopefully I'll get it done on time, right? So that's one way to experience it, right? Another way is like, there's actually something interesting here. I took this job for a reason, some reason. Hopefully, it wasn't just for money. Maybe it was, but I had different options. I chose this path of career or job. I can take some pride in this. There's a creative activity going on here. It might be something very mundane and technical, but there's something coming out of my brain and onto the paper here that I can have some fun with and creativity with. We can choose how we're going to approach that endeavor, even though there are certain constraints that are undeniable around, that do set the context. We can choose our relationship with those contextual factors, take up a path of peace and creativity and ease, even in very kind of mundane circumstances.
Yeah, chop wood, carry water
Yes.
kind of ease.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes many people yearn for that kind of simplicity. Isn't that funny in modern
Yes.
society?
Right.
We've
Right.
advanced so much, and some people are like, I just want to lie down.
Yeah. Right. Let's take a nap. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We have a couple minutes left, and I love to throw two words slash concepts to you just to see your perspective. Mostly
Sure.
because I'll share a little bit, I think probably the concept of belonging and being at home and freedom are two things that have probably driven my spiritual search or yearning probably my entire life without really
Yeah.
even being able to name it at first.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the Buddhist path and people who are interested in mindfulness and taking care of their actions and themselves this way probably think about belonging and freedom and maybe have some struggle with that. So I'm just curious how you relate to these two ideas within the Buddhist path, if you will.
Sure, sure. Well, first, Sabine Selassie wrote a book called "You Belong," and I do reference it in my book. It's a really beautiful book, and it's really centered around this core idea of belonging. My theme, and I believe consistent with hers, if I may say so, is that if we can find that place, or we can begin to cultivate that place where we are whole and complete from the very beginning, we're not actually lacking, we are not needing more things externally to make us, whole and complete, then we belong, right? Wherever we go, we are at home because we are already at center, at peace within our own selves, right? With a deep understanding of kind of where we came from and where we're going. That is another way of being in community. It's a way of being in our space. It's a way of inhabiting our space that says that, I have things to do. I have relationships I need to tend to, but my happiness is not contingent on the outcome of those things, right? My happiness starts from the inside and moves outward. The belonging, and then the other piece you mentioned was
Freedom.
freedom. Thank you. Yes. So yeah, and so it's really kind of two sides to the same coin, right? Because in that space, and this is part of the my version of the metta meditation that I offer in the book, and it's all really how I think about the crux of my practice these days is feeling free to come forth and greet the next moment with an open heart, right? I mean that is at the heart of our day-to-day activities. Is yes, there are contexts. Yes, we have our authentic life experience, and so do those around us. And yes, our feet are on the ground, and there are the materiality of our authentic life experience. And at the same time, within that, we are free. We are able to greet the next moment with an open heart if we choose to meet it that way, right? Whatever it may be, and it can be very sad and painful. It can be very frustrating and difficult, or it can be very joyful and blissful and more positive side of life. And we are free to choose how we advance into that next moment in whatever form it presents itself to us. And that's really gets to the true meaning of happiness. If we can recognize and embody and embrace that freedom that we have, then it's all gravy. It's all great. Even this, even in sad moments, and really sad loss of a loved one. The pain and the sadness is very real, and at the same time, there can be this beauty, right? There's care, there's love, there is a depth there that is a very, very magical and miraculous part of being a human being, right? And so even as we're crying and desperate, that's there too. And that we are free to access that. Does not go away, whatever our circumstances may be. We are free to access that if we cultivate our openness to it.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning the power of choice. I always like to remind people a lot of this is exploring the power of our choices, because sometimes people think like you're just a follower, right, of all whatever.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
once again, it's just a reminder of this is looking at what we choose in any given moment. So I always appreciate a good reminder of that. Billy, for anyone who wants to find you or connect with you, where can they do that?
Yes, they can go to my website, billywynne.com, and they can also order my book from whatever platform they'd like that way. And so I'm also on social, and you can find all that through my website at billywynne.com.
Perfect. Yeah. And I'll link it as well. So yeah, thank you for your time today, and
thank you for having me.
Just being part of the ride with the technical hiccups.
No, thank you for your patience as well. I'm glad we made it work. It's great to be with you.